And we're live on Facebook.
Dedicated to identifying and strengthening innate skills as they appear along the spectrum of ways we think and learn. Our mission is to infuse mainstream learning with enhanced curriculum, customized lesson plans, and demonstrated creative systems. We aim to foster comprehensive learning, enthusiasm, and confidence for all students. The Dean Talks serves as a conduit, think tank, and intensive to discuss how to identify and support unique learning styles. All systems are go. The Dean Talks starts now.
In 2019, California spent $13,686 per student with a 39.73% math proficiency rate. Today, they spend $10,000 more with a 5% dip. Are we ready to admit spending more isn't all we need to make learning environments equitable? Are we ready to look at the ways we treat those of lower socioeconomic status as pariahs and how that spills into the learning environments and expectations? Do we know there's something we can do about what may seem like an absolute link between blight neighborhoods, academic outcomes, and personal achievement? Welcome to the Broke Ain't Dumb episode of the Dean Talks. Today, we're talking about the socioeconomics of SMART. The views expressed do not necessarily reflect the views of hosts, sponsors, or Ripe Fruit Foundation. This information is not intended to replace therapeutic or medical advice. This session is being recorded and will be live on Facebook. Today, we are joined by a phenomenal panel, and we're anticipating a phenomenal conversation. Latina Nicholson, tell us about yourself.
Hi, I am Tina Nicholson, and I am a special education advocate and IEP coach, and I take families from chaos to collaboration in the special education process, and I do that majority for Black and Brown people in virtually any of the 50 states that someone would like to contact me. However, currently I am working with parents and families in New Hampshire, Georgia, Louisiana, Michigan, Illinois, and of course, the state of Florida.
Our other panelist is Kelly Ann Few, a veteran here with the Dean Talks. Kelly Ann?
Yes, good morning, all. My name is Kelly Ann Few, as you stated, and I'm a sustainability engineer. And what I do is I create a balance between community engagement, economic development, and my favorite E's, environmental, energy, and education. And what I do there is strive to work with individuals, whether they're business leaders or students, and help them see their way towards creating a balance and enhancing their quality of life. And it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's open our discussion with a video snippet to set the stage for the panel to join and react. Okay, so engineer,
to low-income families can have huge drastic differences in the development of the brain. On average, they found that children in the states that offered generous monetary benefits had larger hippocampuses, the area involved in learning, memory, and emotional processing. This difference in the hippocampus was not a small one. In fact, they found a 40% difference in brain size among low-income children. Furthermore, these positive changes in the brain weren't only helpful to cognitive functioning, but the children from these states had fewer mental health and behavioral problems later down the road as well. As Lisa Ganeshan, Pritzker Professor of Early Learning Policy Studies at Duke University, wrote, the study's findings on infant brain activity are unprecedented and really speak to how anti-poverty policies, including the types of expanded child tax credits being debated in the US, can and should be viewed as investments in children.
Okay, so very interesting. What we're looking at and bringing to the surface here is how poverty can actually impact the development of the brain. And that's something that is new to me, but certainly not unexpected within the scope of this conversation. Let's get started with our first question. Can we start with the impact of poverty on the child? There is data that suggests that children born in poverty have issues with impulse control and executive functioning. If this rings true, how does that show up in the learning environment? If not, where could this data be short-sighted? Latina?
When thinking about the question and do I think that it impacts children in education? I think definitely. We always think about kids, our children, and they're not paying attention, or we mitigate this kind of idea that children don't know what we're talking about, and they may not understand what we're talking about. However, the impact of the environment around them, definitely they hold that weight on their shoulders. Like they definitely hold if the parents are arguing or the community or people around them are having arguments about being able to keep the lights on. They may not understand what that means, but they're definitely holding this kind of heaviness that the adults around them are having. If they live in a poor community and during the night there are gunshots and we have to worry about ambulance and sirens, and they hold that weight. That way, even if they don't have any true understanding, and as we know that the frontal lobe for most children don't develop until well past their 21st birthday, and that's male or female. So there are gas and no break. Those kind of exciting kind of stimuli would wholeheartedly hold into their impulse control and their executive functioning. Because you look at executive functioning in children, and it's the ability to be able to carry out tasks in a meaningful, methodical way. It's like remembering that we need to put on our socks before our shoes, and then you walk to the door and you get your coat and keys and purse and or whatever things that you're carrying. And when the children are in an environment that is always in fight or flight or freeze mode, they're going to develop that same kind of fight or freeze mode, even as infants. If their parents is always in fight mode, and you can feel that energy, like it's not a like subjective kind of thing. You can feel the energy of a person who is always in fight mode. They are always angry. They are always upset. You can feel that. And so that same kind of development happens with children. And so when people talk about nature versus nurture, I think it is definitely an impact on both. I am born into this environment that is always in fight, flight, or freeze. And I am nurtured by adults that are always in fight, flight, or freeze. So, yes, I will have impulse control. Yes, I will have executive functioning issues. So, yes, it is going to roll over into the academic and school environment. It's inevitable.
Okay. Kellyanne, did you want
to? Yeah, I think it's important that as educators and administrators, we pay attention to the senses, the five senses of the individuals that we're teaching. We know that whether it's what they eat, what they see, what they breathe is going to impact them in some way. So it's very important for us to make sure that we are deliberate in how we address each of those senses that are being developed in the school age child. And I think that will help translate into turning that creative energy and that understanding into art and creativity, innovation. So I think it's important to look at the whole student, the whole body. I hope that contributes, that helps. Mm-hmm.
I totally agree, Terry. And I think also piggybacking on that, because the clip kind of talked about the development in utero of the same sort of thing. So we have to also do that for the expecting mother. Like we have to also think about what environment is the expecting mother in regards to the development of the brain and the child. So I totally agree. Like we have to look at those senses across the board, not just for the child, but the child also in utero. Curious about something.
I think this is interesting because I'm going to tell you a quick story about my mother. So the example that was used was, let's say, in an urban environment, you're exposed to sirens and gunshots and the horns honking and things of that nature. So okay, we realize that. Now the challenge is, how do we work around that? With my mother, for example, she got to the point where she was she's deceased now, but she was a PhD psychologist, an Army psychologist, actually. And she got to the point where she only felt comfortable in an environment that had sirens and horns honking and people chattering in the background, that urban environment. And I remember we went on a sabbatical to the country for a diversity conference, and she literally could not sleep. And I was like, what's going on over there? And she said, it's just too quiet. So that tends to make me believe that there are workarounds that the body either A, is going to intrinsically or autonomically manifest, or perhaps there's some techniques to train folks that are in these environments to, I don't know if it's ignore them and continue thinking, or to absorb that as their reality and continue thinking. But the bottom line is, once we have recognized that these different environments create different levels of stimulation, what is it that we can do to work around that? And I'm going to go right back to the panel for your comments. Latina?
So there are definitely workarounds. The body is an amazing thing. It is amazing in the idea that it will adapt in most situations to what is exposed to over a long time. We also know, especially when you look at special education specifically, that there are ways to teach executive functioning. Like we know that. And there's data and research that you can actually teach this skill, even if you don't innately have it. So there are definitely workarounds in the educational spaces and in living spaces. We just have to be cognizant of how the effect is. And what happens, I think, when we look at data and we look at the environments, there are a lot of spaces where people are just dismissed and the situation is dismissed. And it's dismissed because it's like, oh, that's how they live all the time, or that's just what that goes on there. And it's this assumption that, well, if they knew better, they would do better. And that's kind of, even if we don't say it and people are not saying it, that is the thought. Oh, if they knew better, they'd do better. well, what if I know better, but can't do better because my economic status doesn't allow me to do better? What if I know better and can't do better, but don't have the access to the information? And so none of those things are ever necessarily put in place to allow families or children or whomever caregivers to kind of move out of their situation. So it becomes that even like you, Stephen, or some of us, it becomes we are looked at as anomalies in our communities because somehow we got out of the muck, and it shouldn't be that way.
Kellyanne, I'm gonna, circle back to you as well.
Right. And as we're talking about the environment that we're in and how we're operating within the environment. And so when we talk about training ourselves as DEI practitioners, we have to begin with helping the individual define their environment and acknowledge the diversity and the differences that are within their environment. And once we begin to acknowledge the differences and embrace the differences, then we can move on to really saying, how do I best thrive in this environment? But as we've talked about in other discussions, it's really about first looking at those individuals that are in different environments and how they move, how they think, what do they need in order to be their best selves and to be their best educational self, economic self, just person in general. So I think it's really about the first step of having the practitioners, the teachers, administrators to first acknowledge and value the differences. That's what I would contribute to this part.
Thank you. And I want to acknowledge that Byron, that we saw your comment in the chat. And, I just want to take a moment to say that is why we are here with the Dean Talks. We really are in the position to facilitate conversation and exchange ideas. And we're utilizing technology to make that happen. So thank you, Byron, for recognizing that. We are chugging along on the Broke Ain't Dumb episode of the Dean Talks. And we have a phenomenal panel. We have some great content coming up. Just wanted to quickly remind you that Ripe Fruit Foundation is the sponsor of this chat, and ripefruit.org is where you can go for more information. My name is Stephen King, and I'm the host of the Dean Talks. Let's continue. We have a video snippet now to take a look at to set the stage for our second question. Thank you, engineer.
Maths test scores have sunk and reading test scores. By the way, a new report shows that revenue for the Maryland Teachers Union grew from 19 million in 2013 to more than 26 million just last year. And by the way, within that same time period, maths test scores have sunk and reading test scores plummeted from one of the highest scores in the country. Denisha Allen is with the American Federation for Children. She joins me now. Denisha, I guess the first question is, why is the Teachers Union being rewarded for such poor results?
And that's a good question. Thanks for having me on. We have to ask, yes, why is the Teachers Union able to continue to collect millions and millions of dollars when student performance continues to decline? They should not be rewarded for just the dismal results that's happening, and they should be held accountable. The state legislature should be held accountable because our students are failing every single day.
So let's talk about the schools themselves. This obviously isn't all on teachers. We spend about $18,000 per student here in Maryland in public schools. Internationally and locally, private school students spend less and perform better. So cost doesn't seem to be tied to the quality of education. Is equitable education simply spending more per student, or is there possibly something more? Latina?
It is not spending more per student. It is wholeheartedly something more. Being in the schools, I always find that people talk about money and unfortunately, it is not just on the teacher or the administrator. It becomes the money is linked to test scores, which inevitably limits teaching. And so when you look at private schools or charter schools that are necessarily not linked to this test score data and linked to these state assessments, they get to the business of actually teaching. Um, Teaching and memorizing is very different. Learning and memorizing is different. And when you teach to making sure that children pass a state assessment or get good scores on a state assessment, you are not teaching for learning, you are teaching for memorization. And so when you think about that dollar amount, it's also skewed because the dollar amount usually comes to children based on housing taxes and the equity if you own a home. And so when you think about those children in areas where a lot of people don't own a home, like they rent and then they have multiple children, that home technically and those taxes are only mitigated for one child. So even though we look at it and say, oh, we spent about $18,000 on a child in the district per child, that is the assumption that that is one child. But when you break that dollar up, if one household has 6 children, it's no longer the same sort of equitable, like it's not equitable. And so we have to find ways to remove finance as a means of educating children.
Kellyanne?
Well, we definitely have to consider the economics, but I think when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we need to go back to the definition of DE&I and understand that it's about the growth of the professional and giving them the resources that they need in order to show up to develop and train individuals to progress and perform. Right. So that should be the focus that we're striving for. We have to make sure that the economics match the climate and the environment that we're creating for our children to perform and progress. You know, we have to make sure that the resources are in the community to support the parents and guardians who are preparing these individuals to once again perform and progress. So while yes, we have to consider the bottom line, we have to make sure that we teach our practitioners, our parents, to fight for the resources that are needed to help our children who are being defined as diverse to perform and get access to the tools that they need in order to help them once again perform and progress. So yes, it's about the dollar line, it's about the dollar, but the most important thing is to get the resources and the create the environment that allows for long-term progress and performance. I really think it's important to emphasize on what we're getting from the dollar versus the dollar itself. Thank you. Pass the mic.
Yeah, I'm okay. So just in the spirit of conversation, there was Latina who said that, regurgitating information, just kind of rote memorization is not necessarily learning. Did I get that correct? All right. So what about the introduction of the internet and the use of Google, for example, with these students and how they learn? Are our students still learning as much with the fact that they carry cell phones with them, and they have this extra brain that kind of goes around, and whatever they want to know, they can ask Google? So example would be if you're hospitalized, for example, and we're talking about physicians on rounds. What I noticed in the hospital the last time I was there, I was at Sinai because I was doing a podcast for them. But anyway, I was observing how these doctors are making their rounds now. Okay, so these doctors are making their rounds with their devices, and as they're going to the patients, all of them were stepping off to the side and Googling this and Googling that. So the reason I say that is, are we able to use technology to level the playing field, or perhaps, those of us that learned the old school way without Google, are we, not utilizing that technology to get a larger opinion of whatever the problem is? So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there. How does this technology that these kids, I don't even know what's going on in these schools now, okay? So these kids come in with their cell phones, and are the teachers saying they put the cell phone away, or are the teachers encouraging using the cell phone to research, just like I've seen doctors now use those cell phones to help research patient diagnosis? I hope I was kind of clear. I know we're down a rabbit hole, but that's where I go all the time. So, Latina?
I love this rabbit hole. So, and I love this rabbit hole because we have to acknowledge that there is never now not going to be a time that children don't have access to technology. Like, yes, how we learn, they are never, like, that world is gone. It does not exist. We cannot go back. We are going forward. So that is the first thing. So what we have to do is we have to teach children how to use technology to gain quality information. You would be amazed at how many children and people in general do not know that Google has Google Scholarly. It is not Google Regular, it is Google Scholarly, which is scholarly papers and research about topics. So unlike when I went to the library, or I'm going to date myself as a lady that's getting ready to have a birthday coming up soon, we had to go to the library and look in the encyclopedia, and you got a new encyclopedia every year for the updated information. Google Scholarly lets me access libraries across the country. So I don't even just get to access information here. I can access the latest information about a thing in Japan, in the UK. But what is lacking in using technology is because there is a space in talking about, when we talk about equity, this comes along the line of this kind of ageism, unfortunately, and that kind of, there's a space where people feel like, oh, they still need to know how to add, and they need to do it this way. And we need to be stuck in that way of finding the information. And so it's difficult for people, and the education system is not advancing fast enough with the advancement of technology. So unfortunately, these children do not know how to use it to their advantage. It is like the argument when it comes to AI. People are like, oh, well, AI is going to take over, or it's going to do this. Well, if you are savvy enough, you can put in the right information, and AI gives you a totally generic piece of information, but it is how you ask the question. Just like in research and Google, it's the question that you ask. And so what we're lacking is teaching children, and it's not a new phenomenon, it's teaching children how to be analytical thinkers. Like, that is what is lacking. Like, the analytical thinking, what is the question, information that I want to drill down to using technology to get a quality answer? And then how do I expound on that answer?
Kellyanne, I see you nodding over there. Please.
I am in full agreement. It is about access to information. No matter how you get that information, that the access to information is key. And so making sure that we use economics to give the students the right tools to access that information, tools that work and that are effective and efficient, because now it's our job as practitioners to teach these individuals how to utilize that information, how to apply that information. Because just because you're a doctor who has access to all of this information, and actually we were having this discussion with one of my colleagues who is a guest of today's talk about, once we get the data, what do we do with that data? How do we apply that data to the individual so they could be their best person? So now as practitioners, it's our job to teach the student how to think about their environment, how to think about themselves, and not just simply plagiarize what they got from the AI tool, but how to innovate it, how to bring it to the next level. And so that's our job now as teachers and educators and administrators, to get the people to utilize what they have as their tool, and utilize more than the 10% that is predicted that we use of our brain. We want to encourage the students to push it a little bit more, and to be more creative and be more introspective and expressive about what they know and what they saw on the internet. Back to you.
Okay, thank you. Ebony, I think we should just using this quick conversation about technology, and and it was just mentioned. Okay, 10%. Einstein or somebody said we only use 10%, and now here we come with Google, who brings the other 90%. So how do we take that 10% to steer the 90% that we have access to, which I think speaks to what Kellyanne said. So, Ebony, I think we should probably look at putting a Dean Talk around just the use of technology. And it was brought up, what do the old school kind of thinkers think? I'm like, don't use Google, learn it yourself. However, those days are gone. So how do we incorporate this technology into the learning environment? And maybe that will help level the playing field across socioeconomic status, and across neurodiversity platforms, so that we can continue to evolve. My name is Stephen King. You're listening to the Dean Talks, and we are continuing, and it's going to get more interesting as we move along. Now we're moving to another video snippet.
If you had 3 wishes, what would they be? To be back inside in a house where I can shower every day, wash my clothes, comb my hair, just be having good hygiene practices and stuff, to be inside for that, and to cook. And so that's one wish. I wish I could go back to my former career of data analyst for electricity research, because I really did love that job, and whatever the facts are that I was good at it too, getting back to it seems almost insurmountable at this time. Yeah. I'm sure it's not. Once I'm inside, then it's that much easier, but at this point in time, it's too much. And the third wish would be a dog.
Lurking deep in social media comments, you will find people who are somewhere between being desensitized to outright angry with the poor. I'm going to let that statement resonate for a moment. Okay. Does that anger, annoyance, impatience, and indifference show up in the learning environment? Kellyanne, let's start with you.
Yeah, that is a good question. And I think when you're dealing in diverse communities, there's always going to be where you look at another and say, hey, you're different than me, and maybe I don't quite receive this difference or accept what I'm experiencing in terms of diversity. And we do have a responsibility to empathize with the next and be considerate of the next when we're dealing with social media. Social media is the foundation of how we connect with others now, how we communicate our desires and our needs. So it's becoming the main way we bring everyone to the table. And those who control those media outlets have a responsibility to put boundaries and some rules and guidance in place to protect all who have access to that information and that experience. And so I believe that this is an area when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion that we have to look at closely when it comes to creating rules and regulations around these tools, because it is here, it's happening. We can't run away from it. And really, it's always been here in some form or fashion where we're using technology to progress and give access to other individuals who normally wouldn't have that access. So I'm going to say we have to be more direct in how we bring everyone to the table. And it's going to be administrators and practitioners' responsibility to ensure that there's equity in these environments. I'm going to let our other panelists build on that.
Sure. Latina?
So yes, the short answer here is yes. Yes, there is a definite impact because there is the implicit bias that people have, even if they don't speak it or say it. People judge people, like, and especially in communities of color. If you see a child that is outside, that is uncared for, or what you presume is unkept, nobody ever says, where is that child's father? They always say, where that baby's mama at? Like, nobody ever says, oh, well, where are those? Like, nobody is ever saying, where is that child's adult? Like, the very first question is, where that baby's mama at? So, like, there are implicit biases that we come with. I guess my question is, and I don't actually know how we remove that. Like, I don't have because we know that innately children, if you let small children of different cultures, languages get together and let them just play, it is not a concern. They play, even if they can't communicate, they play. They figure out how to toss the ball. They figure out how to make that communication and get the ball to go from you to here. When they are reared around adults who harbor their internal like concerns or angers or upset or have moved to, or what they believe has put them or displaced them or taken it away from them. I don't know how you remove that for people, or how you make sure that it doesn't impact the greater society. And so social media and that idea of like people being angry or indifferent, I don't know what we can do about that. Like, this is a place that I just don't know how to even provide like something concrete and stable to even as a suggestion, because you can't necessarily change how people feel, um, or you can't change necessarily how people maneuver in life. If that was the case, we could, if it was so easily changed, there wouldn't be obesity. There would not be people that do things that we know are detrimental to their well-being, and they continue to do it.
We have, I think we have to orbit here just a little while. And I see two lanes. One lane is the technology lane. So we have someone, for example, who may be in what we would call poverty, yet they do have a device. That device does not have a cell phone connection. They're not part of Verizon or AT&T or Mint or whoever, but they do have Wi-Fi access. And here in the United States, you can go everywhere from McDonald's to the library or the city bus, get access on your device to touch the sky, which is the internet. Okay. So let's say that the conversation is, we're talking about poverty and we're talking about access. So perhaps it's a perception thing where we have person A who's, on the internet with Verizon talking about poverty, and we have person B who's on the internet via Wi-Fi talking about poverty. Person A is going to say, simply because of that they're on the same platform, that person B should be able to be more accountable and should be able to, because they're speaking on the same platform. I think that is one lane, which is the technology. How does technology give the illusion of equity? When if we dive deeper, we see that one's paying the cell phone bill and the other one is not. They're on Wi-Fi. But the end result is both parties are talking on technology, but the statuses are certainly different. That's one lane. The other lane is going to be the reality lane. The reality lane is, and we're circling back to just this, in some cases, an innate, anger with the impoverished, because I think people have a problem taking themselves out of their space and what they consider success is, and walking in the shoes of someone else. And I'm going to use my mother again. So we were in Goodwill, and thrift shop, and my mother was, that's what she did. She loved to thrift, and she would go through those dresses and those items like super fast, and she would look name brands, just to pull that out, pull that out, pull that out. She had her filter system, and I remember this guy walked up, and I remember this guy walked up and said, "Hey, can I get $1?" And my mother's reaction was, "If you don't take your rusty self out and get a job." That was her innate, and this is the reason I brought that up is because that leans into the question about this innate anger. And I don't know if it will be considered anger or maybe just a misunderstanding. And here's a person who's a psychologist, right? So here's someone who's formally trained, has been through all of these rites of passage. Yet there was an innate kind of just reaction. And I had to look at my mother. My jaw dropped on the ground, and and I was a young guy, but just based on what she said. So when we left the store, I was like, "Mom, why did you tell the guy that?" And it turned out that one of her best friends had just passed away, and so now that changed the algorithm of her thinking, and just whatever popped up, she just gave this kind of coarse reaction because she was suffering from the cause was something that wasn't even related to this guy. So, and again, these conversations are so in depth that we could just do Dean Talks on all these different lanes and really never run out of content. But I just wanted to try out it. We're trying to keep the conversation going, folks. We're trying to start the conversation, and I'm still glad you said that you didn't have the answers, because none of us have the answers yet, but at least we're beginning those conversations. Kellyanne?
See, I think we have to look at access for different things. Now there's access to technology, and then so therefore anyone could, go sit down at McDonald's and get access to Wi-Fi. So that, but then there's access to opportunity And how does that person get the resources to get to that opportunity that they find online? So that's a whole different thing. So once again, as individuals, we have to begin to look with a higher level of empathy for each of these individuals that are dealing with diverse situations, you know. So I think it's just the way we have to look at social media and look at what it's doing for the individual or for us. Is it giving us access to technology and information, or is it giving us access to opportunity? And then once we get access to opportunity, maybe that leads into the discussion of, really, is this economic development? Are we enhancing the quality of life for everyone in an equitable manner because we have access to technology? So maybe that discussion has to be spiraled around those two issues in order to really get to the real solution. And once again, as I said from the start, it's really going back and understanding the environment that each individual is within. What does their universe look like? And how do they move through that universe? And how can we help them with that? So I think, you know, that helps keep this discussion going and help us take action. Back to you.
Latina?
I think that is key, because in thinking about like what you said, and you were talking about Wi-Fi access, and just kind of my experience. I grew up in urban Detroit. I left Detroit and lived in Texas. And when I got to Texas at the time, Texas was so far ahead in technology, like in the places that they were doing identification by thumb stamps, and Wi-Fi was everywhere. And like, it was just so far advanced. And I remember going back home and being appalled that the library in my former neighborhood did not have Wi-Fi access, and they were still using dial-up. And just kind of like, I was like, what do you mean you can't? Like, how does this work? And then thinking about even today and moving forward, and I lived in Chicago, and historically Chicago is identified as a very, like, the whole Chicago is identified as a very dangerous place. However, as a person that lives in Chicago, you can physically walk up to a bank teller in Chicago and go into your bank. Going back to my hometown, you cannot physically walk up to a bank teller and go into a bank. Literally, you have to be buzzed, like the entryway is marred off by plexiglass, and like you are going into the security vault. Then someone has to let you in, then for you to be able to physically go up and talk to somebody. So I do think that looking at the environment when you come to access is huge, and how things are perceived. Because when you note that as a young child or as a child growing up, that, oh, in my hometown, I am already perceived as someone that is going to do harm because I can't physically walk up and speak to somebody in a place. I think it changes this kind of how you speak about poverty on the social media. It changes how you see poverty. It changes how others see your situation in the environment when it comes to poverty.
Yes, that was excellent. And I did want to say I spent some time in Texas as well. And Texas just has that oil money. So they listen, they can just start spending money on stuff that other cities and other areas just don't have the resources for. Now, and I'm going to get back to the script, because as usual, we are way off script today, but it's okay. You know, and when you talk about the access in the Chicago bank and the plexiglass, now not only do we have that socioeconomic and that security protocol, but then guess what happened a couple of years ago? We had COVID. So now we have the security protocol that's hiding behind COVID, and we never really let those processes go. I do know from from the business standpoint that after COVID, we found that it was much cheaper to have video conferences like this as opposed to flying all of you to New York City to have the Dean Talks. So we're using technology, and there are some intricacies and some nuances and some dynamics that are baked in that are security related, they are perception related, they are now COVID related, and we are just working our way through here at the Dean Talks. My name is Stephen King. You're listening to the Dean Talks. This is the Broke Ain't Dumb episode, and we're going to move to another video snippet to keep the conversation going.
To read. I failed the third grade twice because I couldn't read. By all accounts, I was supposed to be in prison. They counted my bed, in prison. That's when we determine how many prison beds we need in this country based on third grade reading scores.
Wait, hold on. What?
That's true.
What does that mean? So what does that mean? Explain that to me. That's a crazy thing. That's really deeply upsetting for me to hear.
It is deeply upsetting and it's sad. Our criminal justice system, they determine the amount of prison beds that's needed based on third grade reading scores.
So does that mean there are actually people that work in prison administration who are looking at scores of third grade and saying, okay, well, here's how many beds we're going to need X number of years from now?
Yeah.
Wow. Talk about school to prison pipeline.
Interject public school to prison pipeline. I've had numerous conversations with folks who are on the other end who are working the criminal justice system and have said that the average reading proficiency for their inmates, third and fourth grade reading levels. That's how well their average inmate can read. And so that's how we get this system of determining the number of prison beds. And it is pretty sad. And like I said, I should have been in prison. My space was already accounted for. And I was forced, based on where I lived, zip code, and many kids across the country still to this day are forced to be in schools because of where they live that are not meeting their needs. And they're going to end up in prison. They're going to end up on the street. It's a sad tale. And so we need education freedom for all students. And we need, on the other end, more elected officials to stand up and represent their constituents. I think that that's also something.
Just like there is a school to prison pipeline, there are pipelines to wealth, pipelines to scholastic success, and pipelines to every stop in between. How can we identify those pipelines and widen the door or send the elevator, helping more students to build resistance to poverty and thrive? Kellyanne?
Well, we know it all begins with the neighborhoods that we live in. We know that our future is defined by our zip code, pretty much, is what she was saying, that economic predictions are based on where you live, and decisions are made in terms of access to opportunity, access to education based on the zip code. And so, yes, it has to go back to holding legislators, holding administrators responsible for making that shift. And I guess it really, we at the grassroots level, maybe we need to begin to educate our families on how to create a platform for change for ourselves and not necessarily wait on someone to define my future based on the zip code I live in. Of course, the zip code that I was born into or grew up in dictated that maybe I would have a job at McDonald's, not that I would have engineering degrees and thriving in society and making a change for the better for all. It just wasn't, that wasn't the story. That wasn't my path. And so at the grassroots level, maybe, diversity, equity and inclusion has to become part of our everyday language. You know, maybe we should start to talk economic and financial growth to our children and making sure they fully understand how do I take this money and grow it? You know, maybe these are the things that we should be talking about in our homes and not depend on this pipeline to prison pathway and just you know, take the attitude of let it ride, see where that child ends up, you know. So I think we have a responsibility to take this back to the streets, back to where we know that we could be most effective when it comes to our families and our communities. And so I'll leave it there, and I'll let everyone, you know, build on those thoughts.
Okay. I see in the notes that there's a story that's Ebony's story. So before we move to our next panelist, Ebony, what is your story with this prison to pipeline or pipeline to wealth scenario?
See, when I wrote those notes, okay, so there will be opposition to what it is that you want to do. There'll be opposition to any goal that you may have in life. So I think that where I was coming from with that was in terms of pipeline. So I think I was going to tell the story of when I was in undergrad. I knew that I was the kid, my grandmother was a vice principal. We weren't in extreme poverty, but we were somewhere in the middle of, we were like lower mid, you know, socioeconomic status. And I knew that I wanted to be a doctor. Like we had this conversation, what do you want to be when you grow up? And we had continually had this conversation. And that being set as a goal kind of set the groundwork for me to go to school, for me to go to undergrad. And I would have conversations, like it really colored how I presented myself as a young person, because when I would have conversations with people, it was like, I'm leading with this. I've already been told this is a winning conversation lead, right? So, but once I got into school, I had never put the studying tools in place to be able to really excel in this competitive biology pre-med sort of framework. So I had talked with one of the administrators at the time, and she wanted to veer me towards botany or some other route. And eventually I ended up finding that I also have an amazing talent for communicating. And at that time, of course, trying to understand which way to go with things, I decided to change my major. It could have went either way. It could have really went either way at that point. When we talk about pipelines, there is something that from the family side, they're kind of creating this child to be who they will be when they grow up. Whatever that kid is doing right now, they're going to be a grown-up doing that either in a structured way or unstructured. So think about the success stories of the tennis players, Serena and Venus, right? They have been trained to be tennis players, and so they are successful tennis players. It's like, take the mystery out of it. So I think the story that I just wanted to share was that it can really matter what you plant early in order to see like what's going to come out as a result. It may not be exactly on trajectory. It might be slightly left or slightly right to it. But just this, you know, this story of seeds planted in me, and for those of you that are in attendance, and like, what are the seeds that were planted, and then what are you planting, right? What do you expect to come out as a result? Just as a conversation opener. I think was what I wanted to share. Thanks for that.
Thank you for that as well. Latina.
Ebony, I wholeheartedly agree. It is definitely about seeds that were planted. I too came from what, when you look at it today, we would have probably been upper, lower, middle class. I grew up in Detroit. Both my parents worked for the autos, and I actually got to go to private school. So like, it was one of those things, is like none of my peers did that, but the seed was planted that this idea that I went to private school, we were looking for you to be something great. I was going to be a doctor, a lawyer, of somebody. Like, it was planted early. We are setting this investment into you, and you should do something great. And I actually was going to be a pediatric nurse practitioner. Like that is what I wanted to do. And I found a love in the community and helping children in another way and education and such. And so my trajectory changed as well. But when I look at that planting seeds and thinking about, I spend my time a lot of in neurodiverse communities, children with autism and ADHD or learning disabilities. I'm even a parent of 4 neurodiverse children. And when I think about my daughter, who is dyslexic and struggled in reading and academics, and, and this idea that you read to her and she's going to be better. And it necessarily didn't work that pipeline, but what thing that I developed in her is her ability to communicate. She can go into any space and speak eloquently about the things that they are talking about. And so, because I learned early and developed that this is the pipeline that we need to develop. Why? Because academically, she is probably always going to struggle just because she's dyslexic. Like I can't fix that kind of thing for her. So how do we develop children in that pipeline? It along the line when it comes to reading, and unfortunately, because the environment, and we've been redlined, and like that zip code place, like it's generations of children not seeing people read a book. No one no longer gets the newspaper. So even, there was a time that even if you did not see the adults around you read a book, you seen them read a newspaper, and they was flipping the newspaper, and something was happening. So then you too understood, oh, I should be reading something. And what does that look like? No longer the days that people are reading. There are generations of families, if you ask them, do they have a home library? And we're not talking about some amazing topics. I'm talking about, can we just have Llama Llama in the red pajama? Like, did you read that book to your child? I'm not, they're like, what? Huh? And it's zip code based. It is zip codes based. No longer are we making children have field trips to the library to get a library card to understand that there's a building of books and you actually turn pages and these books have information that you gather. And so when we talk about these pipelines, there are some specific pipelines that children, unfortunately, and communities and people are railroaded to in regards to education and what they're learning. And we do have to go back grassroots and kind of educate, hey, if you want to move yourself out of this particular pipeline, here are some things, and provide those opportunities. We don't provide those opportunities. We no longer tell people how. We just assume everybody is supposed to get it how they live it, as the saying say. You're supposed to get it how you live it. Well, if I'm getting it how I live it, that means I am still walking down the same path that I have lived. And no longer are we teaching children that the world is bigger than what is happening outside their front door, on their block, in their neighborhood, even though they have access to technology. Because again, access and understanding, learning and memorization, all those things are different.
You said a few things there that prompted me to start thinking and to begin to open rabbit holes, but I'm not going to do that in the interest of time. I do want to say, though, as far as reading goes, you're absolutely correct. What you brought up was the decline of the print, the decline of the newspaper. So what's traditionally happened is you have a newspaper that was being printed daily or weekly or whatever it is. Now that has gone the way of the dodo bird because of the internet, and people get their news immediately now. So I think that what you're saying is, for those of us that saw our parents read newspapers, and now parents are looking at what they read on their devices, those children still need to read. The platform for how that information is being delivered has changed. And I think that we must be aware, as stated earlier, that, just because the print paper is gone, then those words are now on your device. Listening to the Dean Talks, the Broke Ain't Dumb edition. We're going to go to a piece of poetry now to water all the seeds that we planted today.
Thoughts. Dad was never home, and that's his fault. But they treated us like we were locked up too, as if we were found guilty for just being alive, but that's just what it is. Isn't it? Scattered thoughts. The things I know. I know what jail sounds like, and I know that the canines there are why I'm so scared of dogs. I know that prisons are the only gated communities that I have ever seen. They even got security. Scattered thoughts. The things I know. Every month the food stamp card declined. It was never enough. Dad was never home, only he's locked up. But we were the ones imprisoned by the system, in the system. Scattered thoughts, the things I know. I know that it's hard to get into a homeless shelter, unless you got kids. I know that fireworks and gunshots sound the same. I know that it's hard to get Section 8. And then once you get it, you can't let it go until you're fully established, because I know that it's hard to get back. Dad was never home, only he's locked up. But we were the ones imprisoned by the system, in the system. Scattered thoughts, the things I know. I know that they cut food stamps once the eldest child is 18. Or once you make a little more than you used to. I know that in order to keep government assistance, you have to keep up with the new paperwork they give out almost weekly, because Dad was never home. I know that Walmart shoes last a good 2 weeks, but we wore them for months. I know that I teach my brothers not to walk with headphones in their ears, because they always have to be aware of their genetic weapon that threatens, called skin. I know what saving snacks from school tastes like for dinner. Mama wasn't home. Mama was at work because Dad was never home, and that's his fault. But they treated us like we were the ones in prison, so is it his fault? Scattered thoughts, the things I know. Is it his fault that we had to make our beds out of our clothes? Is it his fault we felt like prisoners living in a world where we live like bored convicts? I know statistically, as a Black youth, I'm 4 times more likely to be incarcerated than my white counterparts. They already treat us like criminals. No wonder our peers don't care to commit crime. Fact check. As a Black youth, I live like I've already been incarcerated. Call us juveniles, because Uncle Sam's American dream for the colored kids is a prison cell. No White House or a white picket fence. There's a white man and a barbed wired fence. Scattered thoughts, the things I know. Our daddy's hands feel like glass. At least that's the only way that we ever felt him. Through a clear glass window. Scattered thoughts, the juveniles with clean records, but when they have records, adult prisons, I know that 58% of African American youth are sentenced to adult prisons. Scattered thoughts, I know that 1 in 3 Black men are expected to go to prison within their lifetime. That means 1 in 3 of my brothers, uncles, sons, fathers, cousins anticipate going home. Scattered thoughts, the things I know. Dad was never home. And that's his fault. But they treated us like we were locked up too. As if we were prisoners. The juveniles with clean records. Because Dad was never home. The things I know.
That was emotional, and cycle back to, there's a lot of hidden messages there. The nuclear family. Where is Dad? And we'll let you ponder that, which is the result of art. I mean, art is supposed to get you to think. And that is what we do very well here at the Dean Talks. Now, we're going to move into a workshop mode. So, and what we'll do is we have such great ideas that are being floated out from our panel. We want to see if we can harness some of that. So If there were no rules or barriers and money wasn't an object, how would you address this stat? Panel, here we go. In general, a smaller percentage of low socioeconomic status students performed in the highest quartile of math achievement, in the 10%, in the high percentage. While in high school, compared to middle SES students, 23%, and both percentages were smaller than the percentage of high SES students, 48%, who scored in the highest quartile. So in plain terms, math proficiency decreased with socioeconomic status for high schoolers. When you don't know the income of a child or how the income might impact them socially, how could you address this concern? So it's kind of a treat based on low scores versus high versus low income, and what can be done in the classroom, in the neighborhood to address this. And we're just gonna, this is more free form, you know, feel free to participate. You know, Ebony, if you want to start, and then you know, the rest of the panel can jump in, and let's workshop a couple of minutes here at Dean Talks.
Okay. Happy to kind of start and talk through like kind of some thinking that we might be the seeds, right, that we can grow from here. So the kids show up in the classroom and you don't know what their home life is about. And they can be experiencing poverty, just to open it wide open. It doesn't have to be financial poverty. It could be emotional poverty. It could be, you know, the dad isn't in the house, right? So they're experiencing poverty, they're experiencing separation, lack, and limit. What are some of the first things that could be done either as a parent or as the individual coming into the classroom or as the teacher, right, practitioner? What are some of the things that can be done to help understand who is this child? Let's start there. First has to be identifying them, I'm thinking. What do you all think? And I'm looking for the audience, everyone to kind of chime in. You can come off mute, like let's have a conversation. What are some of the first things that you might do to first even identify and protect that child's identity, as possibly if they're experiencing financial poverty? I assume that's something you might not even want everyone to know, but you'll need to address it. So what are some initial thoughts on that?
Well, it's about understanding the individual and empowering the individual to share who they are and how they see this environment of education. You know, I think we're talking about math, and oftentimes the social message around math is that, oh, I don't do that. I can't do that. I'm not smart enough for that. So it's really about the practitioner and the teacher getting in the space of the student and building their confidence, encouraging them to love themselves, you know, and address some of that emotional, you know, deficit that we have when we show up to the classroom. You know, it's so much when we show up to the classroom as diverse individuals, it's so much more than just math that we're dealing with. And so as a practitioner, a teacher, we have to be responsible enough to grab them where they are or go where they are and make sure that they are okay. That's what I'll start with.
So I have a couple of thoughts, because it changes based on where the child is. So if we're looking at elementary school children, those 5th grade and under, first, classrooms need to be smaller. One adult does not have the capacity to both teach and, for lack of a better way to explain it, love on a child when there are 30 kids in a classroom. Like I can't hold you and still teach math because you need me to hug you. I can't tie your shoe and and still teach addition and subtraction. I'm one person. And so if we're looking at that, classrooms need to be smaller. That's one. Also, we need to be okay with, and classroom school teachers, that not all children get to eat in the morning. And not because necessarily it's food, it's lack of food. Sometimes children don't get to eat in the morning because mama got to go to work or daddy got to go to work, and we trying to get out the door, and I got to get you to school, and oh, my bag, I didn't get to feed you this morning. You'll be all right. They're gonna feed you lunch. Like that is a reality. Like that's not a, oh, you a terrible parent. That parent is working on and trying to ensure that we got a place to stay, we got the lights on, you know. So, okay, I didn't get to do that today. Mm-hmm. And so schools need to eliminate some of those barriers when it comes to elementary children. When we move children into middle school, I think to move some of those barriers, we need to start looking at that those children are painfully aware of their environment. That is when children start making decisions on how they respect adults and if I can trust you or not. So if you want a child to learn, it has to be more about they trust you. Because when children trust you, you can lead them anywhere. It is like the Pied Piper, like if they trust you as an adult. So in middle school, that is where we have to build trust. And unfortunately, there are so many places the trust has been broken. Like their environment, they see it. They know that the trust has been broken. We see it on the news where the trust is broken. We see it. So that is and so that should come before the academics, because the academics will come if you build that trust. And then in high school, I think we need to develop systems where parents are required to be involved. I don't know what that looks like. I am the first one to say I don't know what that looks like. But what I do know in my work is that when children get to high school, parents become hands off in most cases. It's like, oh, okay, they on their way to adulthood, I done my job. And that is when children need adults more, because that is when they're required to make semi-adult decisions. That is when they're required to make, is this person really a good person for me to hang around? Or is this person not a good person for me to hang around? That is when those kind of life decisions start coming into play. And we need to require this kind of parenting and require that the child needs a parent involved, and what that looks like. Understanding that parents work and, all of the other layers that go behind that. But there needs to be some sort of requirement, and it needs to be community-based. It needs to be something that they are folding back in the community, because we have to bring others along. And so we have to kind of create this pathway, as we talked about, this pipeline. So it needs to be community-based.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And so before, I wanted to add a thought too, but Lola, I see that a part resonated with you, and I want to get the full download of what happened. What were you thinking? What were you reacting to there?
Hi. So when Miss Nicholson was talking about, basically molding a child and not being hands off in high school, I remember I was in high school. So I graduated in 2001, and I had a lot of freedom in high school, but I'm from the hood. I know who to stay away from. Everybody doesn't, have that street smart. And I remember a lot of parents didn't want their kids hanging around me because they thought I was a bad seed, but it was really their children. And 12th grade, those are the same parents that were struggling. They were scrambling. I used to stand in the hallway and laugh because I would see these kids' moms up to school trying to get them to graduate. And meanwhile, I had everything figured out. I'm good, and I do wish that my mom was more hands-on. Some kids, I guess, the will of the gods, the luck of the gods, you're able to be hands-off, but every parent should be hands-on, especially in high school, because these people are about to, they're maturing and becoming adults. And so what I was saying is like, nope, you should know better. You should know who to hang out with. You should know this. You should know that. And why should I know? Like, I was just in middle school not too long ago, and nobody frames it that way. Like, I was just in middle school not too long ago, and depending on your age, um, I was in high school at 13. And I was sweating. I remember sweating. This guy, he was like 17 years old, trying to talk to me. I went immediately to the office and called my mom. I was like, oh my God. Oh my God. I was like, Mom, this guy, his name, so and so. I was like, he's 17 years old. And he was like talking to me. She was like, what was he saying? I was like, he's asking me for my number. I was like, he's almost grown. Like, but that was me. Other girls thought that it was cute. I'm like, I came to high school at 13. And it's very important to be hands-on, especially in high school, because a lot of these people, unfortunately, we see it now, but a lot of them didn't survive, whether they fell victim to gun violence, drugs, or whatever else it was. It's very sad, but it's really needed for parents and mentors to be really involved in children, especially in high school.
For sure.
I'm complete.
Thank you. I love that. You know what I love so much about that story, Lola? I love that you had all of this savvy. Now, they didn't know how to help you harness that savvy and spread it wide. And I would fear that they still don't. They still don't know that these kids who now we're spreading out, right? Even from your story, kids are running their whole households at a way younger age than that. Like, these are little adults. And instead of reacting to them, what you see is examples of maybe people reacting to the child, and they kind of getting like, no, I'm in charge of this classroom, but really you have a whole like future leader who has knowledge that could be harnessed. So I'm taking the note that we should flip the model from Latina's comments. We should flip the model, have the parents come in later. And then even if it's community-based, and from when you said that, Latina, I heard have people from the community come in, because maybe that child doesn't have the parents available. Maybe that parent is having their own socioeconomic issues they're dealing with, right? Well, bringing mentorship back for the high school students, absolutely. I heard smaller classrooms. And to that, I heard, even if there's a limitation of the school not having, more resources for more classrooms, why don't we change the design of the classrooms? So those are the things that rose to the top from the conversation, even that we had so far, but I don't want to monopolize. Are there other thoughts and chime-ins or things that we think we could do?
Yeah, this is Byron. I feel that the devil's in the details with any sort of approach, and also any sort of term or catchphrase or ways in which we're trying to define effective ways to help. And something I've thought about probably for the last 10 years is cultural engineering, right? How do we create enough of a positive pull towards something that's obviously moral, ethical, and also just kind and empathetic? And I think acknowledging differences and individuality has kind of this darker side on the same coin, where be different is to be natural. We're very different than trees. We're very different than dogs. We're very different than water. But at the same time, like, right, if you look at those differences, us to other species on the same rock, the differences between ourselves as peers and people as equals is beyond negligible. So that's sort of what comes to mind for me, is how can we try and create a positive pull around the right, reasonable, kind, equitable messaging out the womb, right, for everybody. So it's, hey, all the people that are already here, here's some stuff we think is really important that we think just makes sense, and we'll check your own individual logic meter regardless of where you are. And then if we teach that, just teaching that we're all the same. So that's why things like trying to raise the floor for a lot of people and get the floor equal is so important, because then you have access to those books, to those teachings about these kinds of messages and things along those lines, where you can sort of realize that money is just the current solution that we're trying to use, but the underlying goal is way above that, and that's kindness, empathy, equity, inclusion, and just knowing we're different, yeah, but not really. And everybody has the same needs and they're not being met. How can we? So I guess to surmise, a balance between differences and the individual with just a cultural, community, region, country, and hopefully global perspective of we're all the same, we got the same needs, and it's immoral and unjust that we're not meeting them for so many of our peers. We're all equals. Let's think about this.
Thanks for sharing that, Byron. And I certainly heard in there, first of all, global. We are definitely having a global conversation now more than ever with the internet. And there's so many forums now where we're having a global conversation where before it was so local. It was like my street local. And I heard a lot about just embracing the natural. And of course, there may be a conversation about consumerism and money and what are you going to be and usefulness and all of these things, but embracing that child and kind of understanding who they are and embracing who they are is the beginning, even before they show up in a classroom. And there's a lot more you have in there that we will unpack. So I love this segment. I know that we're at time, so I want to turn it back over to Steve. I think we achieved a lot and I can't wait to download it and send it all out to you if you're interested in hearing what came from it.
That was it was great. And I am once again going to, these conversations spark so much just mental activity that, again, as a broadcaster, I could take this show and we could do another 3 hours easily. But we're not. So we got our big hits and takeaways, and we are at time. I did want to make sure that both Kellyanne and Latina had a chance to verbalize, kind of what they're up to and how they can be reached. Although ultimately, both of these panelists and this entire Dean Talk, as a matter of fact, will be post-produced and will be housed at ripefruit.org. But let's start with you, Latina. What are you working on right
now? Just wrapping up the school year. I'm preparing for what is known in the special education world as IEP season. Once we cross over into January, I'm offering a special to get people kind of started so that advocacy is not cost prohibitive. In honor of my birthday coming up, I am offering IEP reviews for $54, which is unheard of in the advocacy world. That is a price that my peers and colleagues are like, what are you doing? But I think it is necessary because so many people that are in this lane and in this space are so afraid to ask for help or understand what their document should look like. So I am offering that. Thank you, Ebony. And if anybody wants to follow me, see me, I'm on social media. My first name, last name, Latina Nicholson .advocate. I'm on TikTok. I answered, and my handle there is I answer to Miss T. And you can follow, which sometimes leads to controversial, and people don't necessarily always agree with what I think, but I am there speaking. But that's pretty much it. Thank you, Stephen, for asking.
Absolutely. And once again, your information will be available at ripefruit.org. Kellyanne, what are you up to?
I first just want to say that I appreciate this discussion. I think I'm going to go back to the poem that you gave us. The things that I know is that peace, power, prosperity, and protection is what we gain for ourselves through self-love. And so I'll continue to promote that. Currently, I'm providing coaching sessions to small business leaders who need to balance the love for themselves and profitability. And so I help them with integrating systems management approach to how they run their business. We're looking at women-owned businesses making on average $20,000 for the year, and that's unacceptable. And I believe that it stems from not knowing what system to use to build your business. So I'm available for that. I'm also working with a group of individuals who are focusing on health. and making sure that we understand how our body functions. And so trendimmune.com is where I'm working with a group of practitioners who are helping people take control of how we live and take care of this body that we have, this special tool. And kfew@me.com is my email. Please reach out to me anytime. Thank you.
Thank you, panelists. Thank you very much, Ebony Kinney. Thank you very much for facilitating the Dean Talks and being the inspiration for ripefruit.org. There is a poll that's being posted now, so you can fill that out. We certainly appreciate the feedback. And as you probably know, we go back to the drawing board every single week, Ebony Kinney. And we have meetings after meetings after meetings and talk about what it is that we've learned and, more importantly, how we can take this information and craft it into a model for success. My name is Stephen King. It is now 35 minutes past the hour, and that's going to conclude this session of the Dean Talks. Once again, visit ripefruit.org. That's ripefruit.org to get information about Ripe Fruit, to get information about Ebony Kinney, Stephen King, our panelists, and all of the, this is our 19th Dean Talk, I believe, Ebony?
It's our 18th and second full year.
18th and second full year. Okay, very good. So ripefruit.org is where to go to get more information. Thank you for joining, and we will see you again soon for another session at the Dean Talks. Thank you very much. Have a great day. And happy holidays, people. Happy holidays.
Thanks, everyone. Happy holidays.